Judge Grayson thought he was sentencing a naive black teenager and mocked him relentlessly, until the defendant began dissecting the case like a seasoned lawyer. The tension inside the Los Angeles County Courthouse was so heavy it seemed to press down on everyone in the room. Rows of onlookers crowded the benches, whispering among themselves, their eyes fixed on the young man standing at the defendant's table, a table that seemed almost too large for his slight frame, hands casually tucked in his pockets, head held just high enough to signal defiance. 19-year-old Jalen Dawson stood accused of grand theft auto and resisting arrest. Despite the gravity of the charges, the real challenge wasn't about proving guilt or innocence, at least not in the eyes of Judge Walter Grayson. The way he studied Jalen made that painfully clear, reclining in his chair with an air of dismissive authority. Grayson drummed his fingers on the edge of his polished bench and peered over his glasses at the teen below him, his lips curled into a grin that hovered somewhere between mockery and boredom. "You think you're some kind of legal scholar?" the judge quipped, voice tinged with dry sarcasm. "This isn't a high school debate meet, kid." A few chuckles echoed across the courtroom from the bailiff, the stenographer, even the prosecutor. Everyone seemed in on the joke. But Jalen didn't smile. He didn't twitch, because for him, this moment wasn't a performance. It was a test he had spent most of his life preparing for, though never under these exact circumstances. While other teens were memorizing sports stats or mastering video games, Jalen was absorbing criminal law. While his peers were reenacting video game battles, he was hosting full-blown courtroom simulations in his head, arguing against imaginary prosecutors. His mother, Denise Dawson, had spent over 2 decades working as a paralegal, and Jalen had grown up hearing all the war stories about prosecutors cutting corners, judges playing favorites, and defense attorneys phoning it in. He soaked it all in. By the time he was in his early teens, he could dissect a trial better than most pre-law students. But none of that mattered here, not to Judge Grayson. To him, Jalen was just another kid sitting in the wrong seat. "Let's move this along." The judge sighed, flipping open the file. "I've got a tea time at 2. That earned another wave of laughter from the gallery, but this time, something shifted. Jalen's expression twitched just slightly, the barest hint of a smile, because Judge Grayson had just made his first mistake. And no one had noticed yet. Prosecutor Mitchell Carrington rose from his seat with the confidence of a man convinced the verdict was already in his favor. Everything about him radiated polish: his tailored suit, his perfectly symmetrical tie, even the cadence of his voice, like a speech delivered dozens of times before and sharpened to a razor's edge. "Your Honor," he began, his voice carrying through the chamber, "the state will prove beyond reasonable doubt that the defendant, Mr. Jalen Dawson, was found in possession of a vehicle reported stolen only hours earlier, a 2022 Audi A6. The facts are simple. Officers initiated pursuit through downtown Los Angeles after identifying the stolen vehicle, during which the defendant attempted to evade arrest. Upon apprehension, his fingerprints were discovered on the steering wheel." Every word landed with heavy impact. The audience shuffled in their seats. From where they sat, the situation looked clear-cut: a stolen luxury car, a police chase, and now, a young man on trial. Judge Grayson nodded slowly and gestured for him to continue. Carrington stepped forward, the sound of his shoes clicking crisply against the courtroom floor. "The defense may attempt to paint Mr. Dawson as a victim, a case of mistaken identity. Perhaps," he said, turning to look directly at the defendant for the first time. "But let's be honest. What kind of innocent person runs from the police?" His words hung in the air like a dare. The tension climbed. Grayson leaned in, hand under his chin, observing without comment. Jalen, motionless, stared back, eyes steady. He didn't flinch. Carrington returned to his table and flipped through a small stack of papers. "Included in our evidence," he continued, "is a statement from Officer Daniel Ruiz, the arresting officer who claims to have witnessed the defendant inside the stolen vehicle just prior to the attempted flight. The car's stolen status was verified, and the arrest proceeded by protocol." Judge Grayson exhaled slowly through his nose. "Sounds straightforward," he muttered. And it probably did to most of the people in the room. A tidy case, clean and simple. But Jalen had learned to see beyond surface impressions. Years of studying legal battles had trained him to spot inconsistencies and patterns others overlooked. He remained silent, calculating, waiting. Grayson tapped his gavel lightly. Let's hear from the defense. The courtroom turned toward the defense table. Lisa Thornton, Jalen's court-appointed attorney, slowly stood. She had spoken barely a handful of words since the trial began and looked uneasy now as all eyes settled on her. She opened her mouth to speak, but Jalen gently placed a hand on her arm. She hesitated, then sat back down. He took a deep breath and looked straight at the judge. I'll be representing myself, Your Honor. The room froze. You could hear a pin drop. Judge Grayson raised his eyebrows. Excuse me. Jalen's tone didn't waver. I'll be conducting my own defense. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even the bailiff looked surprised. Carrington let out a sharp, skeptical laugh. Well, he muttered, this should be entertaining. But no one was laughing when Jalen stepped forward. There was a shift, subtle, but undeniable in the air. This wasn't arrogance. It wasn't youthful bravado. It was strategy. Jalen adjusted his footing and let the moment stretch, forcing the room to sit in silence with him. Then, with the weight of every practiced word he'd ever rehearsed, he spoke. Before I begin, I'd like to confirm a detail in the prosecution's narrative. Carrington smirked, arms folded. Go ahead. You said Officer Ruiz personally observed me behind the wheel of the stolen vehicle. Carrington exhaled like he'd already grown bored of the exchange. That's correct. And his statement to that effect is in your official report. Obviously. Jalen nodded once and turned to the judge. Your Honor, I move to exclude Officer Ruiz's testimony. A pause. Grayson narrowed his eyes. On what basis? Jalen removed his hands from his pockets for the first time, gesturing toward the prosecution table with quiet control. Because Officer Ruiz wasn't at the scene when the pursuit began. In fact, he wasn't even on duty at the time. Carrington's confident expression faltered. What are you implying? I'm requesting the court subpoena GPS logs from Officer Ruiz's patrol unit, Jalen said evenly. If he really saw me in the vehicle, his location history should match the timeline, but I suspect it won't. The courtroom murmured. The gallery was stirring. Judge Grayson leaned back in his chair, gaze drifting to Carrington. The prosecutor's jaw tensed. Your Honor, this is a sworn statement from a police officer. Are we really going to let the defendant... Jalen interrupted with a small shrug. If he's telling the truth, the data will support it. If not, he let the sentence hang, unfinished. Grayson didn't answer right away. He watched Carrington carefully, reading the silence. Finally, he asked, any objection to verifying those GPS records, Counselor? Carrington hesitated. It was only for a moment, but the hesitation said everything. The jury noticed, the gallery noticed, and more importantly, the judge noticed. Carrington shifted. No objection, Your Honor. But the damage had already been done. For the first time since the trial began, the room fell completely quiet. And this time, the silence was tense. Carrington, sensing his grip slipping, tried to regain control. While we await the GPS verification, he said, clearing his throat, let me remind the court that the defendant's fingerprints were found on the steering wheel of the stolen vehicle. That remains an undisputed fact. Jalen nodded. That's true, he said, stepping slightly forward. But let's examine what that actually proves. Grayson motioned for him to continue. Jalen turned to the jury, locking eyes with each of them in turn, not with intensity, but with clarity. The prosecution would like you to believe that fingerprints equal guilt, that because my prints were on the wheel, I must have stolen the car. He let the thought settle before continuing. But think about it. Say you go into a clothing store and try on a jacket. You slip your hands into the pockets, maybe zip it up to see how it feels. Then you put it back and leave. A few hours later, someone shoplifts that same jacket. Are you now the thief because your fingerprints were found on it? A few jurors shifted in their seats. In the gallery, someone murmured under their breath. Jalen pressed on. That car, the Audi, was parked outside a 7-Eleven earlier that day. I was there with 3 friends. We went inside for snacks. When we came out, we walked past the car. The door was unlocked. I leaned against it. Curious. I even opened it. But I didn't take it. I didn't sit in the driver's seat. I didn't drive away. I didn't steal anything from inside. He let the pause linger. It was a dumb, impulsive move, but does that make me a criminal? His voice sliced through the tension like a scalpel. Not loud, just precise. Carrington fumbled through his notes, clearly rattled. But Jalen wasn't finished. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, may I ask, was the forensic specialist who processed the fingerprint evidence subpoenaed to testify today? Grayson blinked. The question seemed to catch him off guard. He glanced toward the prosecution. Carrington hesitated. No. He finally admitted. Jalen pressed his lips together in a tight line. So, the state intends to convict me using forensic evidence, but didn't think it necessary to have the actual analyst present. He raised an eyebrow. No cross-examination. No opportunity to ask how the evidence was collected, or whether proper procedures were followed. No chance to question the chain of custody or lab accuracy. Carrington's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Interesting, Jalen said softly. Grayson exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose like a man beginning to sense just how far from simple this case was turning out to be. But Jalen wasn't done. Not yet. He took another slow, deliberate step toward the bench. There's one more thing. Your Honor, Grayson looked up. I'd like to submit a written statement from the registered owner of the vehicle, Mr. Raymond Whitaker. The judge frowned. The owner? Yes, Jalen said. He gave a statement to police the night his vehicle was reported stolen. For some reason, that statement wasn't included in the prosecution's materials, and I think I understand why. He turned to Carrington, who had gone still. Do you recall what Mr. Whitaker told officers that night? Carrington's lips were sealed, but his posture stiffened. Jalen pulled a printed document from his folder and held it up. In his statement, Mr. Whitaker said, and I quote, I left the car running while I ran inside the gas station. Some kid must have jumped in and taken off, but it wasn't the guy you arrested. I saw the kid. He was white. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Jalen continued, holding the paper high for all to see. This is from the original police report, the same report that was conveniently omitted from the prosecution's filings. He turned back to Grayson. The officer who arrested me left this out of his testimony. The prosecution ignored it completely. And yet, they asked the jury to believe that I, someone who doesn't even match the suspect's description, am guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Carrington stumbled forward, attempting to push back. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. The defendant was found. I wasn't found in the car. Jalen interrupted firmly. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I was arrested several blocks away, walking home after buying snacks with my friends. I wasn't behind the wheel. I wasn't fleeing. The only thing tying me to this crime is poor police work and assumptions. The silence that followed was suffocating. Grayson leaned back, hands folded, face unreadable. Jalen turned one final time to the jury. The real thief got away, but when officers found a young black man nearby, that was close enough for them. He didn't shout. He didn't plead. He just stated it plainly. And the courtroom, once smug and dismissive, now sat still and shaken. Judge Grayson let out a slow breath and rubbed his temple. The case was unraveling fast, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. Jalen turned again to the jury, his voice steady but filled with quiet urgency. You know what really happened that night. The person who actually stole that car, he's still out there, but the officers found someone who looked convenient, someone who fit a narrative, someone who looked like me. He paused, letting the weight of his words fall. That's what this case is really about. The courtroom remained completely still. Grayson adjusted his glasses and looked toward the prosecution. Does the state have anything further to add? Carrington was rigid, his shoulders squared, face flushed with frustration, but his lips didn't move. No, Your Honor, he finally said, voice clipped. Grayson nodded slowly. He looked back at Jalen, studied him for a long moment, and then turned his attention to the jury. After a pause that seemed to last forever, he leaned forward and said the words no one had expected when the day began. Case dismissed. For a second, there was only stunned silence. Then came the eruption. Half the courtroom shot to their feet, some in disbelief, others in quiet relief. Gasps, whispers, the shuffling of chairs. Reporters scrawled frantically in their notebooks. The murmur of breaking news swept through the room. But Jalen didn't move. He let the moment breathe, let the realization settle in the minds of every person present. Across the room, Judge Grayson was still gripping his gavel, eyes fixed on the young man he'd mocked only hours earlier, but now something had changed in his expression. The smirk was gone. In its place was something unfamiliar: recognition, maybe even regret. Jalen met his gaze, then finally turned to walk out of the courtroom. He was nearly at the door when Grayson called out again. "Mr. Dawson." Jalen stopped but didn't turn around. Grayson hesitated, then said softly, "You should think about going to law school." Jalen didn't reply with words. He smirked. He didn't need to think about it. He'd already decided long ago. Outside the courthouse, the air was filled with chaos, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward like weapons, reporters firing questions in rapid succession. "Jalen, did you know the judge would dismiss the case? What are you going to do next?" How does it feel to outsmart a seasoned prosecutor? Jalen pulled his hoodie over his head and kept walking. He wasn't there to become a viral headline. He wasn't chasing validation or applause. This wasn't about showing off how clever he was. This was about something much bigger. At the bottom of the steps, his mother, Denise, was waiting. Her arms were folded tightly, face unreadable. For a long moment, she just looked at him. Then she shook her head and let out a breath. "You scared me half to death." Jalen rubbed the back of his neck, sheepish. "Had to take a risk, Ma." She didn't answer right away. Then she reached forward and pulled him into a tight hug. "You always were the stubborn one." The cameras kept clicking, but Jalen wasn't focused on them anymore. Across the street, standing beside his car, Judge Grayson watched. There was no arrogance in his posture now, no condescension in his expression, just stillness and reflection. He had walked into that courtroom expecting a routine case, a guilty plea, a name on a docket, another box checked off before his afternoon tea time. But now, he knew better. Because Jalen Dawson had done what few ever managed to do, he made the system look inward. And this time, the system blinked first. The question now was how many other cases had gone this way. How many people had been sentenced not because of truth, but because of shortcuts, assumptions, and unchecked bias. Jalen had the knowledge to fight back. But what about the ones who didn't? This wasn't just one man's battle. It was a window into a broken process. And Jalen knew one thing for sure. The courtroom he'd just left wouldn't be the last one he'd stand in. Only next time, he wouldn't be the one on trial. He'd be the one at the counsel's table. And he wouldn't be alone. If this story made you stop and think even for just a second, then share it. The justice system runs on laws, but it's driven by people. And people only change when we force them to. Because next time, the person in that courtroom might not be Jalen. It might be someone you know. Stories like Jalen's shouldn't be the exception. They should be a wake-up call. A reminder that the pursuit of justice isn't just about laws, it's about accountability, about standing up when the system expects you to stay quiet, about questioning what everyone else takes for granted. Because too often, the courtroom isn't a place of truth, it's a place of assumptions. Jalen had the knowledge to push back. He had the courage to speak up. But what if he hadn't? What if he didn't know how? That's why stories like this need to be told, shared, talked about. Because silence only protects the status quo. If this story moved you, if it made you pause, reflect, or feel even the slightest spark of outrage, then don't let it end here. Share this video. Talk about it. Subscribe for more stories that expose what's hidden and speak truth to power. Let's keep the conversation going. Because change doesn't start in the courtroom. It starts with us.